The sea stretches forever, blue, silent, merciless. A pirate ship drifts through the heat, sails torn, men hollow-eyed. The air smells of salt, sweat, and something rotten. They've been out here for months. No fresh food. No clean water. No place to run. Every creak of the wood sounds like a heartbeat. Every shadow could mean a storm, or a mutiny. They eat what's left. Hard bread filled with insects, meat salted until it's more stone than flesh. They drink rum instead of water because it's the only thing that won't kill them. Sleep comes in snatches, a few hours at a time in swaying hammocks with one hand on a knife. Still, they survive. Not by luck, but by brutal routines and clever tricks the world has long forgotten. What kept them alive out here? Through hunger, disease, and storms. And how did they turn this floating hell into a home? That's the story the ocean never tells. But if you listen closely, past the waves, past the wind, and you can still hear it. The groan of wood, the whisper of hungry men, the rhythm of a world built on survival. Because life on a pirate ship wasn't gold and glory, it was survival. Day after day, surrounded by nothing but sky and sea, men learned what it truly meant to live without comfort, without law, without certainty. Each morning began the same, a shout from the lookout, the crack of ropes, the slow crawl of heat. The ocean was beautiful, yes, but it was also their prison, food spoiled. Water turned foul, teeth rotted, and yet they stayed. Because beyond that horizon waited silver, freedom, and a kind of brotherhood no empire could offer. But freedom came at a price. Every voyage was a gamble. Storms, hunger, infection, mutiny. A pirate's life was short, but it was their choice. They built their own order on chaos, a rough democracy in a world ruled by kings. They shared loot, made their own rules, punished traitors without mercy. Still, the question remains, how did they endure it all? How did a crew of outlaws keep themselves alive for 8 long months on the open sea? To understand that, we have to climb aboard and see what life was really like from deck to hold, from dawn to death. So, step closer. Feel the deck sway beneath your feet. Hear the ropes groan against the wind. The moment you set foot on this ship, the ocean claims you, body, breath, and soul. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Salt, sweat, gunpowder, and rot. The deck is alive with noise, boots thudding, ropes whipping, gulls crying overhead. There's no silence here, no privacy, no peace. Dozens of men share a space smaller than a modern house. They eat, fight, sleep, and bleed side by side. Below deck it's worse, dark, damp, crawling with rats. The air is thick enough to taste. Still, every man has his place. The captain commands, but only as long as the crew allows it. The quartermaster handles the rations. The carpenter patches the leaks, the cook battles rot with salt and smoke. Everyone works or everyone suffers. Storms tear through without warning. Waves swallow ships whole. When disease spreads, it shows no mercy. Fever, infection, scurvy. Yet somehow these men kept sailing, because a pirate ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a floating world, built on trust, fear, and need. They couldn't rely on ports or kings, so they built their own laws, brutal but fair. And when the ocean tested them, when supplies ran out, that's when their true struggle began. At first, it was just a whisper, a gnawing emptiness that no man dared to name. But the sea has a way of stripping men bare, piece by piece. Out here, hunger wasn't an enemy you could fight. It was a shadow that followed you everywhere. On a pirate ship, it started with spoiled rations, meat slick with slime, bread alive with weevils, water that smelled of death. They chewed, swallowed, and pretended it was fine. Because out here, pretending was survival. Soon the barrels ran low. The cook scraped the bottoms for salt crystals. Men argued over crumbs. A single biscuit could start a fight. A rotten slab of beef could save a life. Then came thirst. The sun rose high and burned through skin and sanity alike. Freshwater casks ran dry weeks ago. Rain was a blessing, but storms were rare. They caught what they could, stretched canvas to trap drops, licked the sails, prayed for clouds. When no rain came, they turned to rum. It dulled the pain, made the hunger feel distant, but the rum didn't heal. It only masked the rot, and soon sickness arrived. Scurvy, the silent killer of the sea. Gums bled, teeth fell, wounds refused to close. Fever swept through the decks, and no one could escape the stench of death. There were no doctors, only rough hands and desperate ideas. Tar for wounds, rum for pain, fire for infection. Some lived. Most didn't. Sleep was no escape. The hammock swung above rats gnawing through the floorboards. Men dreamed of storms, of drowning, of home. Some didn't wake at all. Fear grew heavier than hunger. Every shadow seemed dangerous. Storms, mutiny, the captain's anger, or simply the sea's silence. Trust frayed. Paranoia spread. A wrong word could get you thrown overboard. And yet, through it all, boy, they sailed on. Because turning back meant nothing but shame. Because somewhere beyond the endless blue there might be treasure. Because the sea, cruel as it was, gave them something the world never had. Freedom. But freedom alone couldn't fill their bellies. To survive, they'd have to outsmart the ocean itself. And that's where the true genius of a pirate began to show. They learned to fight rot with salt. When they captured ships, the first thing they searched for wasn't gold. It was barrels of salt. They'd slice meat into thin slabs, pack it layer by layer, and drown it in brine. It wasn't tasty, but it kept death away. Fish were smoked over open flames until they turned black and dry as leather. Biscuits were baked hard enough to break teeth, but they lasted. Even water could be saved, filtered through cloth, mixed with rum, or caught fresh from the rain. They adapted, always. When meat spoiled, they boiled it in vinegar. When bread molded, they scraped the green off and ate what remained. They hunted sharks, seagulls, and sometimes even rats. Nothing went to waste. And when sickness came, they treated it the only way they knew, with fire and faith. A wound was cleaned with rum, sealed with tar, or burned with a red-hot knife. Scurvy? They chewed on whatever sour fruit they could find. Limes, if fortune favored them. Most of the time it didn't. For pain, there was rum. For fever, there was prayer. For the dying, there was the sea. But amidst the suffering, they found rhythm, a system that kept them sane. Half the crew slept while the other half watched. Every man had a job, patching sails, scrubbing decks, guarding loot. Order was survival. Chaos meant death. But rules alone couldn't keep men alive. Not when hunger hollowed their bones and the sea tested their sanity. What truly held this fragile world together wasn't fear. It was loyalty. In the middle of nowhere and with nothing but wind, salt, and each other, they built something rare, something stronger than any rope or chain, the brotherhood. Not by blood, but by choice. A pirate ship was more than wood and sail. It was a world without kings. Here every man had a voice. Every share of loot was counted in the open. Even the captain could be voted out if he lost the crew's trust. They called it the code. Not written on paper, but carved into their hearts. A set of rules born from chaos, fairness, loyalty, and a promise that every man would stand by the other when the sea turned cruel. If a man lost a leg in battle, he was compensated from the treasure. If he stole from a crewmate, he faced the lash and or worse. And if anyone betrayed the crew, they didn't need a judge. The sea delivered its own verdict. This strange democracy was what set them apart from the world they'd escaped. The harsh captains, the greedy merchants, the kings who starved them. Out here, the poor could become powerful. A runaway slave could stand beside a seasoned sailor as an equal. Freedom wasn't a dream. It was real, tangible, dangerous. They worked together, ate together, and fought side by side. When storms came, they hauled ropes shoulder to shoulder, shouting over the roar of the wind. When the night was calm, they sang, deep voices rising over the waves, songs of ports they'd never see again. They laughed, gambled, told lies. They tattooed their stories into their skin so the sea could never erase them. Each man knew he might not live to see another sunrise. But if he fell, his brothers would bury him at sea with honor. No priests, no sermons, just silence and the sound of the waves closing over him. That was the code. That was the brotherhood. It wasn't treasure that bound them. It was survival. It was freedom. It was the one thing the world couldn't give and the sea couldn't take away. But every story, no matter how strong the bond, eventually meets the horizon. The laughter fades. The songs quiet. The ocean keeps its secrets, and all that remains are the tales we tell, polished by time, softened by myth. We imagine pirates as legends, fearless men chasing gold across endless blue horizons. But the truth is quieter and far more human. They weren't villains. They weren't heroes. They were survivors, Most died young, swallowed by storms, sickness, or steel. Few ever touched the treasures they dreamed of. But in their brief, brutal lives, they tasted something the world ashore could never offer: freedom. No crowns. No masters. Only wind, salt, and the promise of tomorrow. They built their own world on drifting planks. A floating republic ruled not by kings, but by courage. And though history paints them as monsters, every man aboard that ship carried the same hope: to live by his own rules, even if it meant dying by them. When the sea finally claimed them, their stories didn't sink. They became whispers, songs in taverns, symbols of rebellion, echoes of a wild kind of freedom we still envy today. Because deep down, we all feel that same pull: to break free, to live without chains, to taste the salt air and call it our own. The age of pirates is gone, but their spirit still drifts across every horizon. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the creak of the mast, the crack of laughter, and the endless heartbeat of the sea. This was the real life aboard a pirate ship. No glory, no comfort, just grit, hunger, and a brotherhood that defied empires. If you want to keep exploring the untold lives behind the legends, the secrets, the suffering, and the humanity history forgot, then stay aboard. There's always another story waiting beyond the waves.